Welcome back to Unfinished Business. Today, I am sitting down with Leslie Massey. She's a local farmers insurance agent. And, if you have ever felt like insurance has just become more expensive, harder to understand or manage, or just frustrating lately, you are definitely not alone. But what I love about Leslie, not only is she a wonderful agent, but she is also a dear friend. But what I love about Leslie is she shows up for her clients in ways that most don't and helps us understand what is actually happening. So today we are going to unpack what's actually happening in the insurance industry right now and how she is helping people navigate this with confidence. So Leslie, welcome to Unfinished Business. I'm excited to have this conversation.
Thanks, Kimberly, for having me. I'm excited too.
Yeah. Okay, before we go in depth about all of the challenges that are presenting in your world today, tell me a little bit about this journey. I know a little bit of background. I might have some context to that, but tell me how you got here. How did you end up becoming a farmer's agency owner?
Gosh, I love to tell this story, and we're right at, I think, my 17th anniversary as an agent. So it has flown by. But really, I graduated from WT with a marketing degree. I had every intention of going into the pharmaceutical industry to follow in kind of my brother's footsteps. I thought that's what I wanted to do, but ended up working at the newspaper. Thankfully, back in 2001 when I graduated from WT, but the whole time I felt like I wanted to get into pharmaceutical sales. And so years later, I was hired on with Pfizer for a brief stint, but that was back in 2008 in the crazy financial times. And they ended up having a huge round of layoffs. Most of the reps here were laid off. And so I found myself in a position I hadn't been in before. It was like, oh my gosh, I'm a hard worker. I got laid off. What do I do now? And my older brother again was in the industry, and he was like, Leslie, to do this all again, I would go the insurance route, because at the time his neighbor was a State Farm agent, and he loved the flexibility he had. He just really thought that that might be a career path that I would enjoy. So, as I was interviewing for jobs and putting my resume out there to figure out what my next step was, I was contacted by the Farmers Insurance District office here in Amarillo and had an interview and thought, gosh, insurance wasn't something that was in our family. It wasn't something that I had ever really thought of as a career, but I'm so glad that they called and we had an interview, and it was a giant leap of faith because my husband was self-employed too. So I always had the steady job and the paycheck and the retirement and the health insurance and all of that. But after meeting with the district office, decided to go ahead and take that leap of faith.
Yeah. I didn't even realize that at 2008 that the financial crisis was when you had already made the leap into pharmaceutical sales. So I didn't really know the timeline there. It is kind of interesting, that you're coming up on your 17th anniversary because we're living kind of in that moment again. And I just want to talk about, the jumping off point, because I think so many people, obviously you're great with people and you had a sales background and skill set there. But I think, taking the leap to take that experience and, a skill that you're good at and apply it in a different way is something a lot of people might be intimidated about. But what do you notice back then from what you remember and how it feels now to be navigating in different, obviously there's a ton of changes in your world in insurance. So what are the parallels there that you're seeing?
Gosh, I think as far as the jumping off point, I don't think there's ever a perfect time for anybody, and I think it always probably feels terrifying. I remember how terrified I was whenever because I was all in, right? It wasn't like, well, I'm going to try insurance for a minute. It was, I'm going to do this, and we're going to make this work, and this is going to be, something that we do forever, right? The new career. I'm going to own a business, right? Which is again terrifying. It's 17 years in, there's times when it's and you know too that it's still terrifying. So I think you just have to find that courage and determination and be willing to put in the effort to make things work. Right? It's not easy. I don't care what line of business it is. You just have to have confidence and be brave and go out there and make things happen, take action. The parallels now, like back then, I didn't know what I didn't know, which was a probably a good thing. I don't think I realized, I mean, I knew in 2008 that obviously with being laid off that we were in kind of some hard financial times in the country, but I don't think I realized how that was impacting, the insurance agents as a whole. All I knew is I was starting a business and I needed to go out and bust my butt and find clients, right? And that's all my focus was on. And so I think that sometimes even today we can get distracted by, feeling like the world's on fire with everything going on and be fearful when really we just need to put our heads down and control what we can control, right?
Mhm.
And it's hard to do that the more you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah, yeah. Well, to your point, like you always it continues to be something going out and finding clients, continues to be something, a part of business building that never goes away. And I think the perception a lot of times is that that gets easier. And it does in some circumstances because
Right.
your circle's wider. But at the same time, it doesn't, you can't ignore that activity.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. And that's
So,
what's so fun. I mean, that's
yeah, it is. It keeps it interesting, right? It's always a
yeah,
challenge.
right.
Yeah. Well, take me back to what were those first, few ways of really starting to think about how you want to represent yourself for yourself? Like what did you do early on?
Oh gosh. Back before you had a book of business to manage and to service, it was all the fun marketing things, right? When I was a pharmaceutical rep, there was a new rep in town and he got cookies made that had his picture on them. And he said, I'm the new face of whatever company it was. And so I copied that idea at some point and had
Love
Belmar
that.
Bakery make me pictures with my face.
Love
I
that.
remember they were like $1.50 a cookie, which was kind of a lot, right? I didn't have any money. I was, insurance is commission only, especially when you start. I didn't start with a book of business. I started from zero, right?
Yeah,
Back in the
yeah.
day, they let us do that. And those of us that have made it are really tough because it was so hard. But I remember going to like the Chase building and going to select realty offices and passing out those cookies with my card and saying, "Hey, I'm the new face of Farmers Insurance in town." Um, I would pass out donuts in the morning at apartment complexes. I would go to Donut Stop and buy a couple dozen donuts and get out at 6:30 in the morning when people are, going to work and going to school. I was just trying to do everything I absolutely could to meet people and make relationships, right? So those are kind of some of the funny things, passing out ice cream at apartment complex pools, just trying to meet people, but also trying to be smart. I joined the Realtors Association, the Builders Association, the Apartment Association, and just really started to network in that group. And that was something I was familiar with from the time that we spent at the paper.
Mhm.
And so those three associations really helped me, network and get in with some key people that were referring business. And so those beginning times are kind of fun to think about.
Yeah. At what point did you realize, I mean, you had said earlier, like you had made a commitment, you were all in this, you were going to find a way through and make this work. But at what point did this become more than just a job and you realize like this is what I'm going to focus on and I'm going to continue to build?
Gosh, I think you have to have that mindset from the very beginning. I was an agent for about 5 years before I did an acquisition, and I think at that point, then we really my husband and I had the conversation, "Hey, there were a couple of agents that were retiring, and I had an opportunity to purchase their books of business and to purchase their office building." And it was like, "Okay, if we make this move, this is a forever. Like, we are absolutely committed." To making this work. I'm going to do this for the next 20 years or more, right? Or, is it something? And we didn't even really have to talk about it all that long. We decided, yeah, this is something I enjoy. I think people need a friendly face and somebody to slow down and really talk about the insurance coverage in real terms and how it relates to people's real lives and how it can impact you financially if you have the right coverage or if you don't have the right coverage. So I love people, so it seemed to be a good fit.
Yeah. What were some of the earliest surprises that you came across in regards to those discussions? What did you think you knew maybe at the time and then discovered something different?
But yeah, I think it's just hard. Insurance, the documents you get in the mail are so hard to understand. right? That I think people didn't even really understand the coverage that they had or why they should have higher liability limits for auto insurance. Or I know with my own policy, my own homeowner's policy back in 2009, looking at my coverage before I switched over to farmers, I didn't even know that I had like a 2 or a 3% deductible, and that was really high deductible back then. Now that's pretty customary,
Yeah.
but I think it's just understanding that there really is a need for education in the industry, and somebody that isn't just going to try to sell you a policy but help you understand the coverage that's on that policy, right? And so that you can be prepared for a claim and not caught off guard by a higher deductible or the differences in coverage.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
learning that, just reviewing a ton of policies, you just were building in reps, and so you were becoming more and more familiar with what some of those things were and how it applies.
Yeah, because I mean, it's when you start, you become licensed, but then you're not flying blind, but experience makes a difference, right? And in those early days, we had good training, and we have what I love about farmers back then and still now is we have a district office here in town that helps us. And so I had a million questions as a new agent. What does this mean? What do you recommend? All of those things. And so we have a really good support group, both here in town and on the state and the company level to help us, become good agents, right? And
Yeah.
they're still 17 years in. If you ask me about a specific coverage, I may not know the answer right away, but there are ways for us to find it. And I think that's so important not to just give an answer that you're unsure about, but to double check and make sure that you understand the coverage so that you can advise the client.
One of the many benefits of going with a company that is a national, brand as opposed to an independent agent where you have a lot of that support to answer questions that you may not know have an answer to. So I want to get into, really what as far as how you built your business. There are a lot of insurance agencies, a lot of farmer agencies out there, but yours has been highly recognized not only here in Amarillo, but among, your colleagues across the farmers brands. In your own words, describe what you believe makes Leslie Massey Agency and the way that they care for their clients different than some of your competitors.
That's a good question. I think that I have a heart for service, and my staff does as well. And so it's not about just selling as many policies as we can. We want to be recognized for sales, but we want to do it the right way. Right. And I think that we have been always really more geared for service, especially as we've gotten bigger than sales. I'm fully staffed. We answer the phone. We make, we're going to call you back. I'm accessible as an agent too. And that's one of the things we hear as people are shopping insurance around, or sometimes they're unhappy with their current company, maybe rate wise, but also we hear a lot, I haven't talked to the agent in I don't know how many years, and I call and they don't call back. My office is still in the front of my agency when you come in so that I can hear as things go on, and I'm still very engaged in the day-to-day operation. I miss the early days when I wrote every policy and knew every client, and you can't grow if you're the only one doing that. So we have a really good team, but I am accessible. Right. And I think that makes us different. And we also look for ways to help our clients outside of insurance. Right. So when
Yeah,
I
so
did that acquisition with those other agents that were retiring, they had a lot of older clientele that had been with farmers for a really long time. And so over the years, my staff and I look for ways. Is there anybody that's alone that maybe could use a pick me up? We send flowers, on occasions if someone passes away, or we had a dear client that just recently passed away that for years we would send her like a fruit basket and things at Christmas because we knew that she was alone. So I think we really do try to listen and get to know our clients, especially the ones that have been with us for a long time, because that's what we want is a real relationship, right?
yeah.
That goes beyond insurance. We're here to help if they have a claim and all of that, but I also want to know what's going on with you, right?
Yeah.
What's going on and how can we help? And it can be other things than just sending ID cards and making payments and
Yeah.
all of that.
Well, I thank you for sharing, what taking care of your clients actually looks like in real life. I think you made that very tangible of just picking at like paying attention to the small details and caring. One thing that I can personally speak from my own experience with your agency is the proactiveness on their part of, those are things that I once it's signed, I typically just forget about, and maybe
Mhm.
there are people like me who don't even want to think about it until it's time. But I appreciate the proactive nature of your team and trying to make sure that I know when policies are renewing and things that are coming up that I need to be paying attention to. They notify me in advance, so I can attest to that personally. What's something that you do for your clients that most people wouldn't even think to ask for?
Back to kind of what you're saying is being proactive, trying to schedule policy reviews. If there is a storm in the area, if we're proactive to reach out and say, "Hey, did you have damage last night? What are you guys thinking? Do you need us to recommend a roofer or file a claim for you?" I think those are important, but I think it is the detail, right? When we're onboarding a client, now we have a team that makes sure that all the documents and everything is in and on time so that they have a good experience from the start to the end. Right. And we understand that things change sometimes in the insurance world, and farmers may not be the perfect fit for a family over a period of time. And now we are able to offer other carriers as well as farmers. And so we are even more proactive, I think, on renewals to say, hey, let's look, is this still the best fit for you, or can we do something else? And so we just try to go and two, go the extra mile. Like if somebody's calling and they're like, "Hey, I need to get my lender proof that I've got insurance on this car." Well, we don't want to send that proof of insurance back to the client to have to send to the bank. We try to take that extra step and go ahead. Hey, let us do that for you, right? And if you have a claim, we want to file the claim for you. We want to understand what's going on, whether it's with farmers or our your company, or whether it's filing a claim if you had an accident and it was someone else's fault with a different carrier. So we just try to there's a reason to have a local agency, so we try to add value to the experience and help when we can.
I want to ask some of the more challenging questions of just what the heck is going on in the industry, because I feel like everyone I talked to lately is very frustrated with insurance rates constantly changing, and as you had mentioned earlier, like coverage is changing, and it sounds to me like there's a lot of information that people just don't know about, even from inside farmers, now that you're able to offer different carriers and different lines. So talk to us, from your perspective, what is actually happening right now in insurance in general from a broad perspective?
Yeah, sure. So the last 3 years have probably been the most disruptive time I remember as an agent, as far as rates and changes inside policies. And a lot of that had to do with after COVID, the inflationary pressures on everything, the labor and material rates for construction went up. There were record number of storms in the last few years that impacted especially the homeowners line of business in the state of Texas is really a challenge and always has been. So really right now things are kind of calming down. The last few years though, I mean, I know we were seeing huge rate increases across every company, not specific to farmers, but as a whole industry. Rates are set on historic data, right? And as the inflationary pressures started after COVID, we were not keeping up. The way the rates were set didn't reflect the reality of what insurance companies were having to pay when they were having claims. And so that's why you had to see such drastic rate increases over a short period of time. And again, especially on the homeowners line of business, if we want to have options where we live, especially up here in the panhandle with hail and really anywhere in the state of Texas, companies are having to make coverage changes so that they can afford to still offer coverage here. So that's why you're seeing, a lot of carriers now have a mandatory 2% wind and hail deductible. And
Mhm.
then, what we're seeing too is the way that roofs are covered over time. It used to be that just about every policy was replacement costs and it didn't matter if the roof was 2 years old or 30 years old. Well, now what we're seeing is over a period of time, depending on the type of roof, the coverage is going to change from replacement costs to what we call a scheduled or an actual cash value payout. And that's something that customers, again, it's a phone call we make and a conversation we have, but now that we've had some claims with those coverages changing, I mean, that's very different than what customers are used to experiencing when they have a claim, right? Back in the old days, the roofing companies were able to cover kind of cover your deductible. Now there's regulations against that. Plus the deductibles are just so much higher. And then plus if you don't have full replacement costs on the roof, your out of pocket expense is so much higher than you were used to. And so I think it's important to review the coverage you have on your home. And if you are thinking about changing carriers, make sure that whoever you're looking at going with is having that conversation with you about what's different about your current policy and this new policy, because it may or it may not be in your best interest to make that move,
Yeah.
right? There's just a lot of differences.
What would you recommend right now for someone because it's around the 10-year mark, is that correct? Where those coverage aspects start to change when it comes to roof replacement?
Yeah, some carriers it's 8 years, some carriers it's 12 to 15. I think really what having a policy review with your current company is a good idea, but also just paying attention, right? As a consumer, it's like, unless everybody in your neighborhood is getting a roof, you don't really think about like the condition of your roof and all of those things. And so I think as consumers with all of these changes, we need to be more proactive if there is hail in your area to get a roofer to look and not to just sit on that, because not only have deductibles gone up and the coverage changes over time, but the timelines now to file a claim and to get the if there is depreciation available to get that, they're shorter than they used to
Okay.
be. So it used to be that, you could file a claim, if people didn't really think about the roof unless they were going to list their home on the market, right? And then
Yeah.
it's like, oh gosh, we should probably think about having somebody look. Well, now, most companies, or you have to file within a year of the date of loss.
Ah,
So if you don't have another storm date to use, you could be in trouble. So again, it's consumers need to be a little more proactive, and you don't want to just file a claim. You want to get a roofer that you trust come and look. But those are some of the things that I think are different and that we're just going to have to adjust
yeah.
and do things a little bit differently than we have before.
So what I'm hearing you say, if we were to lay out a plan, if your roof is, let's just use 10 years as kind of that mid
Mhm,
mark, knowing that there's kind of a range, but at the 10-year mark, a three-step plan might be one, an insurance review. Two,
mhm.
contact a roofer, knowing that that replacement cost is coming up or approaching soon. And then three, in terms of, what can be done proactively to reduce those expenses, what would your suggestion be?
I mean, I think it's just to plan. Like, we can't change the coverage inside the policy, right? And so I think knowing ahead of time what your real out of pocket expense looks like and having savings for that, is really the key. But we, like you mentioned, we try to be proactive. We see if our customers are coming up and that coverage is changing, on the next renewal, we're making those calls. Hey, when is the last time you've had somebody look? Did you guys have hail bigger than this? And we can pull up hail maps and figure that out, because we want them to understand if we need to file a claim, let's do it before the coverage is different moving on. But that's not always something that we can control either, right? I think you just need to have that understanding and have money set aside if you can to cover those expenses.
Is there an average? I mean, I know that that varies a lot, but an average kind of ballpark, like, hey, you need to be thinking about putting aside X amount of dollars.
Yeah, that's a good question. It all varies by the deductible, right? So at least making sure that you've got that 2% of whatever your home value is in some kind of emergency fund, it would be probably the best recommendation. And then, roofing companies are even having to look at offering financing at this point because things are so different, right? That customers,
Yeah.
unfortunately, most of the customers aren't going to have 10 or $15,000 in savings that they can allocate. to this. And so, the roofing industry is having to change and come along, and we're all trying to figure out this new normal we have moving forward. So that's what we're hearing from some of our partners is, that they're offering financing and trying to help because I understand from an insurance company standpoint, we need the consumer to take a bigger piece of that pie so we can maintain coverage here and so that people have choices. Like, I get that. But I also think there's unintended consequences to that, right? And the average consumer can't
Mhm.
absorb that huge deductible. And so, will we see people that won't file claims or roofs that won't get replaced? Possibly. Only time will tell how this will all play out. But that's why it's just so important to understand before you file a claim, what is your deductible? What is your coverage? And have those good conversations.
So what you're saying is since COVID, you're seeing since this, increase during COVID, now we're seeing things kind of settle back down and we're adjusting to the new normal.
Yeah, thankfully, I think companies took such drastic action that now we're seeing rates kind of stabilize and everybody's getting used to the deductible changes and all of those things. I think that the changes the companies had made seem to be working to maintain some profitability. We're seeing auto rates go down not only for farmers, but for some other carriers as well, which is a welcome change. So it all depends on Mother Nature and how many storms we're going to have this storm season and what that looks like. It's always a flux, but I think I don't know that we'll get lower deductibles back or any of that, but it seems like home rates are stabilizing, which is good.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, I do wanna shift gears probably to auto, but, I'm curious, what are your clients right now? I mean, in terms of homeowners, you've laid out a very nice plan. In terms of auto, you just mentioned, you're seeing things, go down a little bit, but what are your clients calling you asking for in regards to their auto coverage right now?
That's a good question. I think they're looking at discounts. I think there's a lot of information out on the internet that is trying to gather their information to sell it to agents like me. So customers call and say, "Hey, so I saw an ad and it said if I haven't had a DWI in the last 5 years, I'm paying too much for auto insurance and some of those things." And so I think that you have to be careful of what you see online and what you fill out online because they're sometimes it's tricky and you don't understand that that's an aggregator trying to get your information and sell it to other people. So if you are interested in getting an insurance quote, call yourself, call agents, local agents or companies that you want quotes from. Don't fill out that form online because once you fill it out and submit it, you're
That's
going
a
to get
good point.
a thousand calls for weeks from agents that want to quote your business and your information is sold to several different agencies when you fill those things out. But I think that, people are always looking for discounts and for ways they're asking about if I don't drive very often, are my rates lower? And that depends on the carrier as well. Some carriers will rate based on, that estimated annual mileage. And there's always most carriers now have like a with farmers, we have an app called Signal that tracks their driving behavior and can see what times of day they're driving and if there's hard braking or if they're driving distracted that can offer a good discount. But the other side of that is if it doesn't like what it sees, it can actually make your rates go up. So, those are kind of the questions that we're seeing.
Yeah. And so how do you help someone? I mean, take us for example. We're big blended family, lots of teenage drivers. In terms of some of those programs, I mean, not only would savings be, obviously we would want to save as many drivers as we would have on our policy, but what other things should we be? What other factors should be considering, given the fact that we might, might be in a situation where we have a lot of new drivers making mistakes, and
Right.
we don't want to enter those programs unknowingly increasing our costs.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that especially for a household with young drivers, inexperienced drivers, reviewing your liability limits and in making sure that you've got the right coverage on the vehicles is important. We've experienced some pretty serious accidents with our clients, and at times they have great liability coverage, and at other times they didn't have near enough the coverage. And I know everybody wants to save a buck, but at the end of the day, your insurance is supposed to protect you and protect your assets. And God forbid, you or somebody in your household were to cause an accident where somebody was seriously injured or killed. Like, that's a terrible, terrible feeling to not have enough coverage on the policy to either make that person whole again, or you're worried if you can be sued if you don't have enough coverage. So the state minimums are 30, 60, 25. So $30,000 per person, 60,000 per accident, and 25,000 for property damage. That's nothing in today's world. 30 grand is like maybe
Yeah,
a night in the
good point.
hospital and an ambulance ride. And as far as the property damage side too, 25,000, I mean, you can't hardly buy a car for $25,000, not a new car. So again, if you don't have enough coverage, you are still responsible for that. They can sue you for it. It can become a terrible inconvenience. And so understanding, you know, what the limits mean. We always recommend, higher limits if somebody can afford it. In some cases, the client doesn't want to do that, but I think it's our job as an insurance agent and an advisor to explain and to recommend those higher coverages, especially on the auto. I mean, that's our biggest exposure for most of us. We're out driving multiple times a day,
Every
you
day.
know.
Yeah.
Yep, every day, and especially with teenagers too. It's not if they're going to have an accident, it's when, right? And you hope it's just a fender bender in the
Yeah.
parking lot, which we've all experienced, but sometimes it could be more significant than that, and it's important to have those coverages in place.
You sound very passionate about this, so I am curious about this question, obviously without revealing any personal stories or anything, but in your 17 years of experience, how often have you seen those types of things occur where people just the unexpected happened and they didn't have enough or there was a gap?
Oh gosh, there's one that really kind of changed the way that we operated here. It was several years ago. And it was a family similar to yours. They had multiple teenagers in the house at the same time. And so when we had interactions with this customer, they talked about rates. So we talked about rates and we didn't talk about coverage like we should have. And a member of their household had an accident, and I think there was one death and multiple injuries. I think it was a carload of people. And there were some other factors that influenced the accident and all of that. But the owner of the vehicle was a business owner here in town. So the accident happened, and the very next day I got a call from our large loss adjuster team, and I saw the letter that went to the client advising him to get legal counsel, that his limits were going to
Oh
be
my
exhausted.
gosh.
Like, it was immediate. He didn't carry minimum limits, but he didn't have limits high enough for this particular accident. I don't know that anybody would have had the limits high enough, but he we talked to him about the wrong things because he was worried about rates, and we didn't want him to leave when we should have been talking to him about his exposure and the coverage on his policy. And so after that, I think that next year we sold umbrella policy to everybody we talked to because we told the story. Because you don't
Yes.
understand it as a customer unless you've experienced a bad accident. An umbrella policy is a couple of $100 a year usually, but it gives such peace of mind because what that is and why we recommend it really for everybody, especially households with young or inexperienced drivers or assets at risk. But it is just another layer of liability protection that will pick up if your underlying limits are not enough. So if there is a situation where somebody's killed and you only carry, you know, 100, 300 or 250, 500 limits, that umbrella is another tool for the adjusters to use to protect your assets so that you're not sued, or to make sure that those people that are injured can be made whole again.
I thank you for sharing that story because I think that that is really what, like you said, everybody wants to save a buck. But as you are trying to represent yourself as a partner and as an advisor, looking at the whole family picture, the whole dynamic, and all the activity that's going on, that makes a big difference, and things that definitely the average client is not not accustomed to thinking about, they're just looking at one angle. So you're bringing in different points to have that discussion. You had mentioned that this person was a business owner. From a business perspective, a lot of liability if you have people out driving for you. And I learned a lot just from what our conversations in my business. What do you want a business owner to know based on the story you just told?
Yeah, that bad things happen all the time. It's not if they're gonna happen, it's when. And so I think as far as your business having good limits and understanding your general liability coverage, what is that covering for you? Do you need, professional liability? What is your risk there? Or do you have workers' compensation, right, is not required at this point in the state of Texas. But if you had an employee that tripped and fell in the office or fell in the parking lot coming in or were injured, in the day to day operations of your work, again, having those policies in place, like a workers' compensation policy, it's worth every penny you pay in premium to know that that employee can get their still get paid and not out of your pocket as the owner, but the workers' compensation policy pays that and then would cover any medical bills that they would have too. And it also protects the business owner if you were to get sued for some type of workplace, injury. That workers' compensation policy will pick up and pay out up to $1 million for those things too. So I think that nobody, again, I think people don't like to pay their insurance bills, and it's just another bill until you need the coverage, but you're so glad
Yeah.
to have it if it's there. Yeah. I didn't touch on business auto, but it's the same, right? What exposure do you have? What are those limits? Because people are likely to get an attorney if they have an accident with a business owner or in a vehicle they can see is owned by a business. There's an attorney on every corner, and so it's important to make sure that you've got some protection for yourself.
In terms of what you would want people to know about how to even get this process started. So you're in business for yourself or you have for a long time and you just need things to start fresh and you want to make sure that you have every angle possible thought about and looked at. What do you want to say directly to business owners in Amarillo?
Yeah, that getting a new insurance quote or getting a insurance review is easy. It's just a quick conversation, and if we could see the current insurance documents you have, that helps tell your story as well. But it really isn't difficult. It's just a few pieces of information, but I think it's time well spent to make sure that you've got all your bases covered.
Leslie, help us to define your personal brand in your own words.
Oh gosh, I think that what sets us apart and what has made our agency successful is that we truly do care. We care about our clients, we care about doing the right thing for our clients and having those hard conversations and just being upfront about what coverages are and aren't, and that we want what's best for the client, even if that's not what's best for my pocketbook or what's best for the agency, that we really do put the client's needs ahead of our own.
And when someone becomes your client, what can they expect from your agency long term?
A relationship, right? A two-way street with communication, us being proactive and giving you options and helping you make informed decisions about your insurance policy. And a lot of fun. We love it when clients come in to visit. We love to get to know them, and we have regulars that we look forward to seeing all the time. And that's the best thing about this business is those long-term relationships that you build as you know, spend years with the clients. That's the best.
Yeah. How do you want people to feel after they've worked with you? What do you want them to walk away with?
A better understanding of the coverage that they have and a better understanding of how we, came to the limits on their policy. And I think that we definitely want them to feel like they can trust us. I think trust is a huge thing and that we're being upfront and honest about coverage and that we really are making recommendations because we care.
Yeah. Beyond home, auto, and business, which we're all familiar with those lines of service that you offer, what are some things that Farmers is corporate is doing now as an agency, and new products that you are able to offer that people may not be familiar with?
Yeah, that's a good question. We haven't really touched on life insurance in this conversation we've had. But Farmers has really taken some initiative, and we have reimagined our life insurance application and the application process. And now it is more streamlined. They're using a lot of AI and data that's out there so that the underwriting process is quick. Most policies now can get approved the same day. And the majority of them don't require an exam. And so it's really a change from like the 10-page life insurance application and having to go
Yeah,
to paramed and all of that. They're really making investments to streamline, not only life insurance, but that's probably the most drastic change we've seen from Farmers over the last few years. So that the application process is easy. We send it to the client, they fill it out on their own. It comes back to the agency, fill in a little more information, and we usually have an acceptance. If the policy's accepted, we can say, okay, Kimberly, you were accepted. We applied for $100,000 worth of coverage, but you're actually approved for 2 million. So then you have the conversation and can narrow down what coverage you really need. A lot easier than we had in the past. And I think
yeah,
life insurance is something that everybody needs, right? Nobody likes to think about it, but policies at work are great, but you need something as a family that you can control because we're not always going to stay in the same job, and health changes over time. And so that's definitely something that we're focusing on this year in our agency is life insurance and business. We're well known for auto and home, and we do a great job at that, but we're really trying to diversify our offerings and offer more life insurance and business insurance as well.
yeah. This may just be my perception of this, or misperception, we'll see. But I think that there might be two buckets of people that put that, or that delay the decision of life insurance in particular. And I can think of one bucket for sure because it hits close to my heart. But I would love for you to speak to the young adult, 20s, just starting out on their own. What do you want to say to that person in terms of not delaying that decision, and at least starting the conversation with an agent and starting to build the relationship by having a life insurance policy? What do you want to say to that person?
Gosh, that life is unexpected and we don't ever know what's around the corner. And getting at least some kind of life insurance coverage locked in while you're young and healthy is just such a blessing to your family if something were to happen. And once you get something in place, there are ways that you can make that, a more permanent plan. But I think just getting something in place, as soon as you get married, or even if you're not married but hope to be married someday, lock it in, because the longer you wait, the more expensive it gets. And then life is so unpredictable. We all know people that, have gotten cancer or had heart attacks, or something just crazy unexpected happens early in their lives, and then they can't qualify for the coverage, or it's a lot more expensive than it needed to be had they locked it in when they were younger. And that makes all the difference in the world, is if there's
Yeah.
coverage there or if there's not.
Thank you for sharing that. I know a few people I'll be sending this clip to for sure. Okay, now my other pool of people that I think that would, again, correct me if I'm wrong, or if you see another angle, but I think the person who knows that they need it is someone who is married and has kids and something to protect, right? But I think as we age and we move out of that phase of life where your demands of family are less or shrinking, what next? Because that's a very confusing step. How much life insurance do you need? Do you still continue to need something in place? Can you speak to that group of people?
Yeah, I think that I think we're in that group of people, right? Where I took out a 20-year term almost 20 years ago. And when you take that out, you think that that's forever, but here I am, in my late 40s going, okay, now do I need life insurance at 65? Probably so. So it's time to do something different. I think just not setting it and forgetting. And that it's hard to do because most of us are in this bucket. But we started to do life insurance reviews last year, and I think I framed it in a way that you've got to think about it. Do you want coverage into old age? If you do, you need to do something about it today, right? Whether that's converting a term that you have into a more permanent policy, whether that's helping to supplement your retirement savings by getting some kind of permanent insurance that can, help with tax-free cash value, or if it's just I met with a client before we started this morning that she's had a $50,000 like variable life insurance policy since she was in her 40s and she's 65. So we're just making sure that it's funded correctly so that it lasts into old age because that's what she wants. I
Mhm.
think life insurance is such a blessing, whether your kids are little or whether they're going to be adults when you pass away. Having something in place to pay your final expenses or to leave a legacy for them is something that they'll never forget. But you have to take action. People just put it off. Like we chase people. They're interested in it and we have the conversation and then they don't pull the trigger. And it's so frustrating from the agency standpoint because we see it later. If you walk in my office at 65 and go, hey, let's look at life insurance options, you may not have the 400 or $500 a month it's going to take to keep a policy in place. But if you start younger, you can. You just have to take action. Stop delaying it and really
Mhm.
think about the coverage you have now. When is it going to end if it's a term policy or if it's a permanent policy? Are you funding it correctly to make it last as long as you want it to last? You know,
Yeah.
an agent can help you do that. We can absolutely look at any policy that you've got in force, tell you the ins and outs. A lot of times, a replacement may not be in your best interest, but if your term is nearing the end of that term of time, the policy can continue, but it continues at a much higher rate than your term was locked in for. And in some cases, it might be better to just take out a new policy. But go to somebody that
Mm.
you trust,
Okay.
have them review what you have, and then you can figure out what your options are moving forward.
So speak to the I think when things are unclear as humans, we just tend to stall, right? So speak to directly to the person who's just living in fear because there's a lot of confusion and that they're not really sure what these terms are and they feel hesitant. Speak directly to that person. What do you want to say to them or what do you want them to know?
I think that you need to find somebody that can explain it in a way that makes sense to you. And if you have had the conversation with somebody that's not explaining it in that way, have a conversation with someone else. Because it can be overwhelming and there can be a lot of moving parts inside some of these more permanent life insurance policies, but really the premise is simple. How long do you want this policy to last? And then it's up to the agent to explain how to make that happen, right? Whether it's a term policy or a permanent policy. I think you've got to take action because again, life is unexpected. You've got to get something in place.
Well, Leslie, this has been very helpful in just understanding, the do's and the don'ts and the whys, and you've shared a lot of great tips. Any final words or anything else that you want us to know that I didn't ask?
Think so. Again, I think it all goes back to having an insurance relationship with somebody that you can sit down and have a conversation with, and whether that's me or that's someone else, I think that's so important because the devil's in the details and you've got to be able to have somebody explain those details. And if you are having a claim, you need a local office and an agent that is going to advocate for you. And I think that that's what my agency provides as well. Is we're on your side, right? We represent the company, but we're on your side.
Yeah. So how do we connect with you? Let us know or just describe, what someone needs to do now. So they've heard this information, they're ready to take a step forward. How easy is it to do business with you?
Oh gosh, we make it so easy. So my office is located on Western, right across from Bangkok Tokyo in the Olsen Plaza office complex. You can stop by any time of day or give us a call, 806-352-7388, or find us on social media. I'm on Facebook, either personally or professionally, but no, we definitely do our best to make the insurance process easy.
Thanks for sharing everything with us, Leslie. I have a final question that we ask every guest on the show, and I'm curious to hear your answer. So, this is what we call the three lessons. It's kind of a hypothetical scenario. So, follow me here for a second. So, hypothetically, let's say you connect with as many people in Amarillo and beyond as you possibly can, and the Massey agency goes beyond your wildest imagination and continues to live even after you. You can't share any, conversations or what it took to get there or we can't have any track record or trail of what you did in order to create this entity or this legacy rather. But what you do get to leave behind, and this does not just apply to business, but just in general, what you do get to leave behind to all of the clients that you've served and anybody aspiring to follow in your footsteps, you get to leave three lessons only. What would your three lessons be?
Hmm. Probably like, don't give up even on the hard days, and make the right decision even when people aren't looking. But I think just slow down to and enjoy it.
Well said, my friend. I adore you. Leslie, thank you for all that you've shared. We will definitely link all of Leslie's contact information in our show notes as well so that you can connect with her. I'm sure she would be happy for you to stop by, call, or send her an email to set up an appointment and have a discussion about your future insurance needs. So thank you for tuning in to this conversation. Leslie, thank you.
Thank you.